Call the October the 19th, 2017 meeting of the Farragut Municipal Planning Commission to order. We're going to start with citizens forum, and that is if anybody in the audience or on the Planning Commission has a question or comment that's not related to anything on the agenda, we can do that now. Otherwise, we'll move on to Mark. Do you have anything?
No, I don't have anything under citizen forum.
I
Okay.
have one thing.
Okay.
I'm not sure if all of you have heard where Gary Palmer is moving on to Roswell, Georgia, and we are losing our assistant town administrator. And we know it's a good thing for him, but it's a sad thing for us.
Right. I have told him it's with mixed emotions.
Yes.
Because he has been very diligent with the Planning Commission to, when we've had issues that need research and expertise, he's been one of our go-to people and always comes back with spot-on information and information that we can understand,
Yep.
which is
He's worked with us on a lot of, committee type,
Right.
assignments to look at special action items
projects and
Projects,
right, and so we're gonna miss
through the
that.
years.
Yeah.
Gonna miss that, but he deserves a bigger and
He
better.
does.
So
Yeah.
we hate to lose him. So we'll approve the agenda, and Mark, you've got a couple of.
Yeah, we're recommending postponement on items 5 and 6. They're not ready for consideration at this
Okay.
time.
With those postponements, I move for approval of the agenda.
Excuse me, we'd like to be heard on item number 6.
Mark, do you?
Well, as y'all know from the staff recommendations, there's a number of significant comments and incomplete information from that request, and I think it would be a bad precedent for us to consider something that incomplete at this time. We can certainly put them on the next staff developer agenda and work through some of these issues, but it's not ready for consideration tonight.
Any other comments?
Yeah, it just looks like there's a number of significant items there, so I think it's best to postpone it, and I stand by my motion.
Have a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So we'll see you next month, hopefully. Approval of the minutes, so we'll move on to item number 4, discussion on a public hearing. No, approval of the minutes, I'm sorry. Approval of the minutes for September 21st, 2017 meeting. Messed me up when we have approval of two different things.
Move to approve.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Abstain.
Who seconded that? I'm sorry. Oh, Betty.
No, I abstained. Mark?
Two abstentions. Okay.
And usually our planning commission members abstain if they were not here at the last meeting is a reason for that. Item number 4, discussion and public hearing on a site plan for a proposed storage building to be located on the Town of Farragut outdoor classroom property at 220 North Campbell Station Road as part of an Eagle Scout project. Will Harry, applicant?
Okay, let me just go over this a little bit here. I know the applicant's here. This is a minor site plan, as you know from the packet. It is an Eagle Scout project proposed at the town's outdoor classroom property off Campbell Station Road. The proposed storage building there is kind of that little black box there on the screen. A few months ago, the applicant met with the town's stormwater coordinator that oversees the outdoor classroom, Lori Saul, to talk about constructing a 10 by 10 storage building on this property in a fairly discrete portion of the property. As you all know, there's a berm that parallels Campbell Station Road from this property. Basically, we talked about that with the applicant, discussed it with our code staff and our public works director. And what they're proposing at this time is to construct this building by using the vertical lumber planks that would be salvaged from barns, and then have a metal roof that would be green to match the existing pavilion that's out there. Obviously, a question that was raised with the applicant, was our architectural design standards as they would apply to structures. We talked about the masonry requirements and things like that. There are some flexibility embedded in the design standards for minor projects. And what we conveyed to the applicant was that if they could try to use materials at a minimum that would be compatible with the objectives of what we're trying to promote at the outdoor classroom, sustainability, reuse, repurposing products, that might be more sellable because they could distinguish what they're doing on this property. If somebody questioned how they build a building out of wooden planks, we could have a good reason for that. That would be consistent with the objectives of what we're trying to do there. So it is a small building, and it is in a discrete location as well. It probably would be very hard to see from Campbell Station Road. Certainly having the storage building would be very helpful. I don't know if y'all have been on the property. We have a small bin out there that's in pretty bad condition. It's in very bad condition. So, and we store some tools and things that we use on the property. That's just real convenient to have them there. So this would be a real asset for that piece of property. They're also planning to set up, put the concrete slab wide enough to where it could have a couple of rain barrels, so there would be rain water harvesting on this project as well as part of this building. So that's what's being proposed. Again, the staff's recommendation would be to approve, since it does have objectives that satisfy the outdoor classroom. And he would also need to obtain a building permit and make sure that the supplies list is updated for budget purposes. Our Lori Saul uses that for some information related to the outdoor classroom property, how money is spent and stuff in relation to that. So with that, Will's here. If y'all have any questions of him, he can try to answer those, but I think it's a very good project.
Will you come up to the microphone and just tell us who you are and what troop you're in?
All right. My name is Will Harry. I'm a part of Troop 444. We meet at the Farragut Presbyterian Church here, and I'm working on my Eagle Scout project. So, I don't know. Is there anything else?
Does anybody have any questions about the building, or?
Is it going to be locked?
It will be locked. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
That was my first question.
Yeah.
Mark, why do we require a budget on this? In all my years of looking at
Well, I
site
know-
plans and projects, I've never seen
I don't know
anybody
that we
submit a budget.
I think Lori needs it for some accounting stuff that she does in relation to the outdoor classroom. I know Will has to do it as part of the Eagle Scout project.
It was just submitted as part of the package.
I
He'll probably
believe.
be raising money and doing some other things, looking for donations, so it may affect your budget positively, let's hope. But it was just a
Yeah.
housekeeping question that I had. I've just
Well,
never seen
and the
a
town
budget on it.
also is, we're paying for the concrete portion of this. So
I saw that.
So we just needed to, make sure we're all on the same page about who's spending how much and what.
Okay.
So it's a minor thing. He had it pretty much correct. He just needed to update a couple of things related to expanding the concrete slab to accommodate the rain barrels.
Will, how are you proposing to raise the money?
I'm planning on selling chocolate bars in my school, Farragut High School, and outside of stores in Turkey Creek, as well as car washes by early November.
Will your fellow scouts be helping you?
They will, yes.
Good.
Well, we applaud you for your efforts and your commitment to the community. Thank you.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing it. Now we can go down to item number 7, discussion on request to readopt the Farragut zoning map to correct an error in the zoning designation for property at 12603 Evans Road and to change the designation from R-1 rural residential to A agricultural. Town of Farragut applicant.
Let's see, hold on one second here. This is kind of an odd item. It's, we're correcting an error in our zoning map coloring that actually has been in place since 2003, as best we could trace it back. It was recently brought to the town staff's attention by the property owner at 12603, who's been there for many years, that his property is shown as R1 on our zoning map, but it is agriculture. It always has been zoned agriculture. But in looking back at the record, the zoning map amendments, the error occurred sometime during the process of rezoning the property, which became the farm at Willow Creek, because some of those properties around there were also rezoned at that time, and I guess his got grouped in there somehow, and it wasn't actually part of any drawing or ordinance. So what I conveyed to the property owner was that after talking with Tom Hale about it, because it was kind of an odd situation, if it was a situation where we hadn't already adopted the entire zoning map a number of times, then I could just, have an administrative correction of the color, with our GIS person. But since the zoning map has been adopted showing the error, we, at some point in the near future, will need to, as part of a rezoning, would need to make this correction to the property at 12603 Evans Road to show it as agriculture. It's my understanding that the property owner wants it to be taken care of relatively soon, but I think he could wait until we have a rezoning so we could just kind of dovetail those together. Because it's been, like I say, it's been an error out there for 14 years. So it was an odd one, and we thought he was mistaken, but I had Alexis at the time go back and look through all the records, and he was right. It never was part of a zoning map request. So we will take care of it. I just wanted to report that to you if you all are okay with incorporating that into a future rezoning. It's just a discussion item at this time. Does anybody have any questions on that?
That was my question. So it's just discussion at this point. We don't need to do anything tonight, or?
No, I just was going to see if that was an acceptable process, or if you wanted me to go ahead and put it on next time for a resolution.
I think it should be on next time for the
Yeah,
resolution.
just go ahead and take care of it,
too.
clean this
Can.
up.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
Does it even need to go to this body, or should it go straight to the Board of Mayor and Alderman?
No, y'all do have to make a recommendation.
Even
On an
though it was an
ordinance.
error on our part?
Yep.
All right, what I don't want to do is I don't want to hold up the landowner. So let's say the landowner wants to have chickens or
It's
sheep.
allowed in R1. Yeah, he can do, it doesn't, I'm guessing it's probably for tax purposes, but, and I don't know why it wasn't caught much earlier than this, but it wouldn't change how he uses
Okay,
the
there
property.
wasn't something pending that
No, in
he's
fact, he's
trying
already
to resolve.
He already has agricultural uses on the property right now,
Okay.
which are compliant with R1 or
What
agricultural.
as long as you're over 5 acres?
1
and
acre
you're
in R1.
Okay,
Just
1 acre
one
in
acre.
R1. So.
Yep.
Well, actually, it's actually zoned A1, isn't it?
It's zoned R1, but it should be zoned agricultural.
Just A.
Oh, I thought it was just colored wrong. I thought
No,
it
it's
was-
zoned.
It got,
It's
Yeah,
actually
that's the
zoned
problem.
that way too.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's because we adopt the map as
Map.
an official
Adopted the
exhibit
map, yeah.
to the rezoning
Yeah.
is the reason. So they kind of they keystone together.
Yeah.
Well, if this is for tax purposes, then is it possible that, given we pass a resolution next time, that that'll be sufficient evidence that it should be A then? And
Yeah, I'll
for
put it on as
tax
just
reasons?
like a regular rezoning
Okay.
request. Yeah.
Okay.
So it'll be a resolution and an ordinance.
And then he can go to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen
Yeah.
in December.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Go through the zoning map amendment process just like anybody else, but I wouldn't imagine it'd be an issue.
Okay.
We didn't charge him for that rezoning, did we?
We
Okay.
won't charge him for that. No.
That
That would be insult to injury. No.
But you will post notices and,
I will have to post notices and a sign on the property, and just like a regular rezoning, absent the $350.
okay. Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks. That'll be on there next month then. Item number 8, discussion on a request for a zoning map amendment to the property located at 1333 Fleener Road to change the zoning district from R1 rural residential to C-1 general commercial, 1.1 acres, Robert G. Byrd applicant.
This request involves a small parcel on North Watt Road, just north of Fleener Road. It is currently zoned R1 rural residential. The applicant's requesting this to be rezoned to general commercial. It's currently actually used as a residence. It's actively being leased. There's a trailer there that's being used, has been for many years. And access is provided onto Fleener Road. There is no Watt Road access for this property. As you all may recall, Fleener Road was closed in 1998 because, and the western portion of this road is, and really much of Fleener Road is, barely wider than a driveway. It varies from 15 to 20 feet in width, depending on what section you're on. The properties that are, as you can see on this map, that are to the north and the south of this property are currently zoned general commercial. And certainly it's questionable to the staff as to whether R1 is an appropriate zoning district for property that fronts on North Watt Road and is surrounded by commercial. But I think there's some important, maybe larger considerations in relation to this request from the staff's perspective. One thing that we always look at when we look at rezonings is what does the future land use map show? As you can see, this property is shown as part of a medium density residential area to the north and much to the west as well. That was shown as a land use at the time because it was a transitional land use between Watt Road and the single-family residential subdivisions, Cool Springs Estates and Sedgefield to the east. So that's why that was shown as medium-density residential and not commercial. The applicant has also submitted a future land use map amendment request that would change their parcel from medium-density residential to commercial. So it just depends on how our discussion goes in relation to the rezoning request as to what we would want to do with that. Frankly, in these kind of gateway corridors of the town, the staff's opinion is, we need to really look at these closely and think about not just one parcel, but groups of parcels and what do we want to see in the future in these areas. You got the park over there. It's like I said, it's a major entranceway into the town. I again would agree with the applicant that rural residential is probably not an appropriate zoning district for that property. But something to keep in mind is if their property is rezoned to commercial, the staff couldn't support an access onto Watt Road because it wouldn't nearly meet the 400-foot distance requirement. The parcel only has 220 feet of frontage on Watt Road. So you'd have property that's zoned commercial that would access a road like Fleener, and I don't think that would be probably a good situation. Really the land uses along the North Watt Road corridor, really we haven't looked at those very closely in the past because we haven't had a whole lot of activity out there. But I think this could be kind of something that could initiate a little closer look at this corridor and what do we envision this to be in the future, instead of kind of a hodgepodge of different things, maybe have a little bit more comprehensive view of this. Frankly, from the staff's perspective, I would like to revisit Fleener Road itself. One of the things that was identified in their land use plan update was a lack of connectivity, and closing the collector street, in my opinion, as a professional planner, is probably not something I would recommend. So I think there might need to be a community discussion on whether we want to consider revisiting Fleener Road. Obviously, it would have to be improved. It's very substandard, and certainly it's straight. That's another problem. So I think one of the reasons it was closed, as I recall many years ago, was the people that lived on that corridor complained about people cutting through there and going 50, 60 miles an hour on a 15-foot wide street. So we'd have to, have a community discussion to see if, in fact, there was interest in that, and then how can we slow the traffic through that corridor if, in fact, we wanted to consider reopening it. It's up to you all in the community. I just think, as a professional planner, having more options and more connectivity is generally a good thing. There's lots of transportation benefits and there's lots of safety benefits for emergency service response times and things like that. So it's something that maybe should be revisited if you all want to. I just bring it up at this time since we've got this before us. So those are just some of the considerations that I wanted to point out with this request. I don't think their request is unreasonable at all, given what's around there, but I do think we need to give it some thought. Think about the accesses, think about the land uses and the transportation pattern that we envision in that corridor now and 20 years from now.
I guess in that corridor now you have the veterinarian and Jones Automotive, right?
Yeah, as far as commercial, that's right. Yeah.
Plus you got rural metro across the road.
Yeah, rural metro. If Fleener Road were extended to Watt Road, it could basically be made to line up with the access into the rural metro fire stations site.
A little background again on why it was closed. I understood you to say the width of it.
Memory
and
of
the
that
traffic.
was speeding. It was people,
It was speeding traffic.
and it is a
Residents on that
very,
road.
very substandard road.
Yeah.
That was, I'm sure, a legitimate issue. There's ways you could address it, I guess is my point, but
Was that considered as
I
my
don't know,
question
I don't
at that
recall
time? I
that.
don't know that.
It
Whether
also
that was brought
exacerbates
up.
the traffic queue, and that way that turn lane backs up there
Yeah.
routinely.
Yeah,
wondered
you
if
could.
any-
So people come out to make a left going south.
Yeah,
It's
you
a
could be
huge
stalled
issue.
there. Yeah. Now, if you're going north,
So
it's
north
probably
is-
a good
But that
thing.
speeding and the straightness was a big
Yeah.
criteria I remember
Yeah.
back when.
That's what I remember too.
Do you remember any discussion being at that time about improving it?
They were going to fix the
That was
1998.
It was a long time. I suspect it was budget constraints.
Yeah, pretty serious budget constraints to repair roads.
Mark, talk a little bit about the size, the 1.1 acres.
Well, that is large enough to be rezoned to commercial because it's a 1 acre minimum lot size. I think this request relates kind of to the next agenda item. Well, it relates directly to it, frankly. I think there may need to be a larger discussion of our general commercial district, and it may need to be broken up into different characteristics and different use allocations and design requirements based on what the community's vision is for different parts of the town. And this gateway area could be one of those that might be more, especially given the fact that you got single-family residential and a park in the area. It may be a good candidate for, kind of a neighborhood commercial area where it's kind of scaled down. It's errand-based uses that people can get to without having to drive or certainly drive not more than 5 minutes to get to it. Do you have something, Ed?
I'd like to comment on that because I think both those last two items, these properties are kind of outliers on item 9.
Yes.
Your
I would
discussion
agree
is,
with that, yeah.
Developing and looking at the walkability and livability criteria and the,
Yep.
as you go from commercial to residential,
Yep.
that we've been working on, that these little, small parcels that are really not agricultural anymore, and they're, in the R1 or type, probably isn't applicable either. To this.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. R1's not appropriate for this parcel. Yeah. Here's a map of the existing land use out there. This is from the tax assessor's office in KGIS. And the yellow is residential. The red is commercial. The purple is like the vet clinic and office type stuff like Vasey's office is there.
See, when I look at that, it makes sense to me that it's zoned what it's zoned, because the lots right across the street, although
Yeah.
they're zoned commercial, aren't being used as commercial. That was the argument on Union Road with the Swan property, because those properties are zoned commercial, but they're not being used that way.
Yeah.
My struggle is this. It's not safe to put an entrance to that property on Watt Road. It doesn't meet up to anything. So to make it commercial without an entrance onto Watt Road doesn't make sense to me. To make it commercial and have the entrance on Fleener makes no sense to me, because you're not going to want to put, well, no one's going to go down there to access a commercial property by going on, the way you'd have to get to it is from Hobbs Road all the way down to Fleener. So that's my struggle with this from a practical.
Unless you opened up Fleener and improved it. But
And Fleener, to improve that, it seems like that would need to be improved from Sedgefield to all the way to the end, and that's about a third of a mile, which is
It's-
a little over $1 million.
it'd be a big, yeah. I mean,
Plus
it's
whatever
got
traffic
some modest
calming.
improvements in front of the Cool Springs subdivisions and Sedgefield, but it was still, it has some very substandard sections, and even those sections I think are only 20 foot wide streets. So
And then you have to consider the consideration of what kind of traffic calming will you put in there to
yeah, where you have space
that's
for.
I mean we just can look at that and know that people are going to pedal to the metal
Yeah, it's straight.
from Hobbs straight down to Fleener, and that's not a good quality of life when people are flying through past your neighborhood like that.
No.
So that's my struggle. From looking at it from a zoning point of view, yes, everything around it is commercial. So if you're just looking at it from a bird's eye view, but the access to it is what's kind of hurting
Access
it.
is a problem. Yeah, it almost needs to be combined with other parcels to the north.
Yeah.
That would help with the access. Obviously, then you could get a access that could possibly comply with the
Yeah.
distance.
You get it farther away from that queuing and that turn lane.
Yeah, that too.
I mean, that to me is a
Yeah,
huge
that's a problem.
consideration.
Yeah.
Is the applicant here that maybe we could hear what the Are you Mr. Byrd?
No, I live next door. I'm gonna try to give you some input on this.
All right.
You guys are busy, talk it out and I'll talk when you're done.
Well, traditionally, we'll listen to the applicant first, and then, unless you're speaking on behalf of the applicant.
I don't see Mrs. Byrd here, so I don't know. I'm just
Is-
trying
I-
to give you some input and
Well,
that's fine.
we want your input. We promise, we want your
I
input.
mean, have you been on Watt Road between 5 and 6 in the afternoon?
I have.
Yeah, you can't get out on it.
Yeah, you're
The thing
right.
is, are you gonna, we need to make
Hold on,
that
just a
whole
minute, hold
area
on, just a
commercial.
minute, hold on, just a minute. Mr. Byrd, will you speak first and?
You'll
and then
come up to the
we'll get
microphone
back with
and
you.
give us your name and address, and then we'd like to.
We'll get back with you.
Right on.
Okay, I'm Robert Byrd, and I'm from Martin, Tennessee, 1631 Pleasant Hill, and this is my mother's property that we're looking at.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Byrd, or do you have any statements that you'd like to make?
No, I don't have any real statements. It's obvious that we're trying to zone this commercial, of course, for the economic value of it. And I am hearing what the board is saying both ways, so I do understand. I was not aware that, or my envision was that there would be an entrance on Watt Road, but I think I'm understanding that there's not enough there to make an entrance on Watt Road?
Yeah, we require 400 feet between access points on arterial streets like Watt, so it wouldn't meet that requirement without a variance request, and we really need to give those real serious consideration because, we want to make sure we're not establishing a precedent with somebody else. So, yeah, it's 400 on Watt Road.
That's basically the distance between your proposed driveway and any of your neighbors' proposed driveways, as well as the folks across the street.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's a little challenging to get
Yeah,
that
I
400 feet.
understand that. Yeah.
Or across the street from an existing driveway. The problem is the existing driveway across the street is beyond his property line
Yeah.
north.
Yeah.
So that's the struggle.
The rural metro station driveway to deal with, and it just creates conflicts out in that center turn lane.
Yeah.
Is where the real
Yeah.
challenge. Actually, there's a center turn lane right there on Watt Road.
Yeah.
And of course, we were looking at it the way you have also looked at it, that it's sandwiched in between commercial properties.
Right.
It's right across from rural, man.
And we, of course, our goal is to sell the property. And I can't really speculate on what type of commercial establishment would want to go in there.
Anybody else have any questions or comments for Mr. Byrd? Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, will you tell us, give us your name and your address, please?
I'm David Vandola. I live at 13027 Fleno Road next to Mrs. Byrd's house, place there. And let me tell you now, when I fought to close that road because there was too much traffic on it. What you need to do, and this would solve all your problems, zone all that commercial. All along Fleener there, what's left, because there's just going to be a couple of houses. The brothers just bought the Dewson property. And everything's for sale at Dixie Lee Junction. As soon as the sewer gets in there, it's going, But I'm just saying, I'm trying to get in on this too, because I'm going to be stuck with commercial all along, and I'm this first house on the road there, you understand? And I just as soon go live in the country somewhere if I can do that. I love my location, it's really nice, but that traffic is getting pretty bad out there, about 5 or 6 in the afternoon, plus all the construction at Dixie Lee Junction. I just wanted to come in and give you my 2 cents worth, and my neighbor Clay, we were saying, well, gosh, we need to get in on this commercial so that what they need to do is make it some kind of office park in there. Be perfect. You sell it to them, you have them do the road. The ones that buy, I don't know, it's just a suggestion. I just wanted to put in my 2 cents, and if y'all have another hearing, I'll be down here for it.
Well, good, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Understanding, sir.
Hey, there he is.
Let's see.
he living right here?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Hi, I'm Clay
He was
Pilkington,
living right here.
and in 1999, I bought the
Well,
property,
can you give us an address, please?
yes, 13021 Fleener Road.
Thank you.
There's the Bird property, David's property, and my property. It's changed down there quite a bit. When we bought the property, we don't live there. We live over in Andover Place. But we've really enjoyed that little property down there. It's where I had my garden and that sort of thing. But it's changed. When we moved there, we had like 12 neighbors, mostly elderly. And I think David and I are the only two left. So it's really changed, and commercial is closing in. My property, and Mark, forgive me, I'm not a planner, but my property on the rear is bordered by Vasey. Across the street is bordered by the property that recently sold. It would make sense to me, like David, I agree, to rezoning, just bring that line right down through Vasey, right from Jones, just a straight line right down beside my property, and take commercial all the way to Watt Road. Then I think the solution is to close off Fleener Road there at some point, either at my property or the next property, the Knight property, and reopen Fleener Road at Watt Road as a major road into a larger parcel of commercial. It'd be sort of 120 degree shaped, I guess, if the Myers brothers included their property in this. But it seems like an entrance off of Watt Road that would be improved and meet all the conditions into all these properties would make sense, because I read in the paper where you guys are looking for prime commercial property, because commercial property in Farragut, even though we've got some blighted properties, and we all know where they are. I've lived here since 1990, so I know where they all are. But if you're looking for a good commercial property, this corner on Watt Road and Kingston Pike, what better place would you want? So I'm throwing our property out for inclusion in a workshop or whatever, to just bring that line straight down and possibly opening up Fleener Road to solve all the problems that's been mentioned tonight, especially if you closed off Fleener Road there just beyond our properties. Now, I don't know how these Cool Springs and Cool Springs Estates, some of those, I don't know how those residents would object anyway, because it's closed off now at Watt Road, so it wouldn't cost them anything. But what I'm talking about would solve all the problems. Now, you'd still have individual owners of the commercial properties. It wouldn't be like a one lot or anything like that. But as you guys could encourage somebody to come in there and develop all of that property. And I think it could be made a really nice gateway coming from 70 and 11 and Watt Road. It's right there, visible.
Would that be a total of about 4 acres or what?
Well, I've got a little over an acre. David's got a little over an acre, and I believe 1.1 acres. So the three of us have over 3 acres there. And then, no, I don't know if you want to speak. I don't even know if you agree with what I'm saying. But
It's certainly something to consider about.
it'd be a lot of acreage right there on the corner. And it could be developed sort of like the up there at Parkside and Lovell Road. Remember all those houses that were in there, and they all got together and sold and developed a great location there. And I think with Mark's guidance, that this could be done the same way.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions or comments from anybody? This is for discussion purposes only,
I
correct?
have a comment. I think to close it all, to open it up at Watt Road, to open Flino up, and it's really going to impact Smith, Union Road, first of all, Union Road, over to Smith and Grigsby Chapel. Traffic comes through there now. People go down Hobbs and turn from Loudoun County, turn on to Union Road. So I think to open it up at Watt Road and not close it off somewhere else, such as Mr. Pilkington said, that sort of makes sense.
This is a piece, but you had the entrances up here.
What he
down
says.
here. Get rid of that.
I don't know if it's good planning
I
or
understand
not.
what he's talking about, yeah. That's an interesting thought. I mean, yeah, I mean, you could, you have to work with, obviously, the property owners and have somebody buy a bunch of properties, but they could also keep Fleener closed to where it's currently at, but then come off of Fleener and build a new public street that goes further north and comes out further north on Watt Road that would be at a better access point on Watt Road, so you could still get, and that would also provide a significant curve in Fleener Road so that it wouldn't be a straight shot. You could still get to Watt Road from Fleener, and it would also provide access to whatever develops around it. So it'd be a section. Of course, you'd still have to improve Fleener Road in its entirety, in my opinion at least, which is, that's certainly not my decision by any means. We got a lot of road projects.
Yeah.
So
Mark,
that may be a very low priority.
Could I ask a question for clarity? Does Fleener Road up to Cool Springs Estates now, is it adequate for that local traffic there?
Is it adequate?
From Hobbs Road down to Cool Springs Estates, it's adequate for those subdivisions now,
It
right?
was widened somewhat as part of all three of the developments that front along it. Sedgefield widened it.
Yeah.
It's
some.
adequate for what's there,
Sedgefield.
but probably not
Adequate
adequate
for what-
for any more
It's
development.
adequate to their points of their
Yeah.
accesses, yes.
So that would be where I would cut it off, right somewhere there.
Yeah.
So that you wouldn't have to improve from there east. It would just be improving just an entrance or something off of Watt Road.
But I think what Mark's saying is with some of our connectivity philosophies that we're trying to adopt, we're trying to enhance connectivity, not necessarily shut it off. And so what Mark was saying is if you had a road that maybe came out somewhere up near the vet clinic, somewhere in there, you
Yeah.
could meet the 400-foot rule and make it somewhat circuitous to get over to Watt Road, so maybe it's not as easy of a.
Yeah, it might
Have-
be something that kind of goes, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there, but it would take that, it'd add some significant change in the alignment of the street, which would slow traffic. You could maybe even do some kind of a creative small roundabout or something, I don't know, but, just to bring it up, and that'll also get you further out of that stacking on Watt
The
Road.
problem with that, Clay, is as much as that is exciting to think about, there's a lot of dollars involved to figure out, and it still would require improving Fleener Road all the way to Union Road, or excuse me, to Hobbs Road. Well, the corner of Union and Hobbs.
Yeah.
And so it's still a big prize. It's probably at least $1 million. But trying to figure out now, once the properties become valuable enough and you can get a private developer to say, okay, now the real estate's worth enough, you can go in and assemble a bunch of parcels. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think there's a market demand for it yet. Obviously, we have, decided to invest in that area with the Dewson property, but it's a real long-term play for us. Well, I don't know if it's 10 years or 30 years, but I think these are all important things to think about as we're working through some of these areas, because this is not going to be the last time that we have smaller, sometimes substandard parcels that are in desirable areas for something other than residential development that we'll deal with, and we're just trying to think down. Now, you've brought something that we weren't necessarily thinking about, but again, our task not tonight was just that one parcel. The applicant said, Mr. Byrd asked us to look at his particular parcel, so that's kind of what we're focused on. But we, as you can see, as the dialogue we've gone through, we look at a lot of other things, and the big challenge with that parcel is where's the access going to be if it's a commercial parcel? Well, I think we've all pretty much agreed that it doesn't make sense for it to be on Fleener Road as Fleener Road is designed and built today, and there's some real challenges with putting on Watt Road, and so what does that, where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us a really tough piece of property to rezone to commercial. So that's kind of the task at hand, is to focus on that. But I do appreciate you coming up with some ideas of other ways to skin the cat that might make sense for a larger master plan development with multiple parcels and a much larger acreage. That would make a lot of sense there. And it very well may happen. I just don't know when it's going to happen.
Well, and what we want to, and what our vision might be for land use, because we are looking, the two things that we've pulled out for the Comprehensive Land Use Review Committee is town center and what to do with undeveloped pieces of property. So this certainly falls into that. I think what he talked about kind of puts you in a position of thinking about neighborhood commercial. Mm-hmm. That would be a really good location with the park right there.
Yeah.
We have that housing. We're going to need something to kind of buffer that. A denser housing might be a nice thing between neighborhood commercial and that housing. There's a nugget of a really good idea there.
You still would almost have to have the entrance onto Watt Road on up near the park, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's the hardest part about this is where's the access go?
That falls into line with Mark's thought about Circuiton,
yeah,
Fleener on up,
yeah,
around.
Well, also in consideration for that, when the property on the catty corner to it develops, if that comes out with apartments, that's going to throw more traffic down through there too.
yeah.
So all of these are pieces that we're going to have to put together somehow.
That's one thing that, like Louise was saying, that this group, our land use group, is going to be looking at next Tuesday in particular, is just looking at some maps that show, large kind of vacant or underdeveloped properties in the town and how is land currently being used, kind of like what's on the screen there. And, what makes sense. That way you're not kind of biased by the future land use map or zoning maps, and you're just kind of thinking about it from a fresh perspective. What makes sense 20 years from now? What would we like for that corridor? What kind of colors would we want to see 20 years from now on that corridor? And, and then try to get some provisions in place that would help us move in that direction and be a little bit more maybe proactive about it. And that can take a long time because that's a lot of visioning, a lot of community engagement. We got some great feedback from people along this corridor tonight that I think has had some excellent comments and thoughts. There's no right or wrong answers, but I think there is a lot of opportunities in that area. But it is probably going to take a fair amount of time unless we just get the right person to come in that really, has some kind of great plan that, but I think it's going to basically end up with a number of the properties being combined in part of a larger project that hopefully would kind of transition well between the lower density residential Watt Road and the park and maybe connect them all. And like Louise said, kind of a neighborhood. It's almost like an activity hub potential area there. So it's
now, when you speak of corridor, are you talking about the North Watt Road?
Yeah, I'm talking about from the town
Kingston
limits.
Pike there?
From the town limits at North Watt Road to Kingston Pike, that corridor of North Watt Road.
Well, it also would involve actually that portion of Kingston Pike to North Watt Road too, wouldn't it? I mean, that whole corner there.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
And the corridor could be expanded or contracted. I mean, but it generally that general major entranceway into the town I think those areas of our community need a little more focus, and not just, this is what it's zoned and here's what you can do in it, and it really doesn't get you, and oftentimes what you really want for the future.
Mark, can you show the town limits, and are they the same on both sides of Watt Road?
Yeah.
Let's see if I've got a map of it on the other. You can see at the top of the screen, there's the town limits. It comes in at a slight angle, but it's basically the same. But there's a lot of, undeveloped property along this corridor.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of potential. It's kind of like Outlet Drive. It's just a, has a lot of potential for sure.
Medium density, residential.
For a community that is we're about 80% built out or so, we really have some great opportunities to have some really nice shots of excellence in the underdeveloped properties that we have. We really are in a place of blessing. It's just, we really need to maintain a vision of what it is we want to see for our community. This is one of those where there's a lot of undeveloped properties that if we maintain a vision about what we think will be sustainable, we could have something really special there.
And that one, unlike Concord Road corridor, we do have control of both sides of Watt Road, so that's, helpful. And Outlet Drive, we don't really either. Well, we do to some extent, but we definitely do on Watt Road through this section.
How far is the city line, the town line
Here.
from the interstate?
It's
From the
pretty
interstate,
There.
I'd say it's probably a quarter mile, maybe. A little bit over a
From
quarter
what
mile.
road?
From town limits to the interstate.
Just down, basically it's the crest of the hill, pretty much.
Yeah, it's maybe a quarter mile.
Yeah, if that.
And is that Knox County that is next there?
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, the neighborhood idea just really appeals to me.
Well, I think that's a good location for that because you have a lot of already developed single-family
Right.
residential, and you got the park.
That part
both
is
of
a
those
real
things.
attraction to me.
That intermediate use that can tie those two together, I think,
Yeah.
is really important here. Same way it's like McPhee, the roundabout area. That's another situation where you've got a lot of potential for connecting that part of the community to the park.
we just need somebody with a lot of money to come in and do it?
Yeah.
Rita, that's you.
Well, what do you all want to do with this particular request at this time? It sounds like there might be some things, uncertainties, but it's up to you all.
Well, we've got this, residential now. The land use plan's got the medium density,
Yeah.
and now this is a commercial request, so we gotta keep, there's three
Yeah.
items that are really involved. Go forward.
But can we do anything really without having the access to Watt Road?
Well, I would recommend that we maybe engage our steering committee and let's get a little more in-depth look at some of these important activity hub areas, and maybe we can get some guidance and some thoughts to work with these property owners, and we understand, what they're wanting to do, and I would be the same way. I don't have anything against that. We're just trying to think about all this for the future and what it means and to give it a little bit more comprehensive thought. So I think until we go through that process, I would recommend not taking action on the request at this time. I don't know if Mr. Byrd is acceptable to that, but that would be my recommendation.
Well, this is just discussion tonight anyway.
Especially given the access problem here, because
Yeah.
I think that's a
the
real
biggest
issue,
concern.
and
Yeah.
it's part of
Help
that.
Could that be helped any by the road development that's going on down there now, or is it just?
No, that's further south. That's really not going to help that particular parcel, no. At Dixie Lee, is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah. It'll help the general flow at the intersection of Kingston Pike and Watt Road
Yeah, 'cause
quite a
there's lot of
bit.
people going interstate
Yeah,
that way.
it'll
then going
definitely help
down,
that, but I
coming
don't think it
down,
will directly
walking
help
down.
this parcel.
It backs up incredibly there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Construction.
Okay, so any more questions or comments? If not, we'll move along to item number 9. Discussion on permitted uses in commercial zoning districts and whether any should be removed or subject to new parameters. Town of Farragut applicant.
Go through this. It's obviously this is related to the previous item, and probably a lot of items that come before us. As I mentioned in the packet write-up, we, based on a recommendation from the staff back at the August Planning Commission meeting, you all had given us guidance to create a steering committee to look at our land use plan and land use in general a little bit more intensely, and to try to maybe focus in on some things and prioritize some of the strategies that are in the plan, because there's a lot of stuff that if you're trying to do it all at one time, you just get bogged down and really don't get anything accomplished. So the real goal of this group is to try to come up with some concrete recommendations that we can take to the public and get their thoughts on it. A couple of things, as Louise mentioned earlier, that we looked at all 8 strategies, and we ended up prioritizing strategies 1 and 8, the development of a downtown strategy 1, and then strategy 8 to try to plan for our remaining vacant parcels. These are obviously interrelated and interrelated to some of the other strategies, certainly. But what we were talking about as part of this group last time, and a recurring theme that came up, was that we really need to pay close attention to the limited available land that we have left and try to be smart with how it's developed, and be a little bit more proactive rather than reactive, and not say, well, gosh, I wish that hadn't have gone there, because that's really not what we wanted to see. Try to get ahead of that a little bit before people try to develop properties. So that's really what they were trying to do. So some things that came up, as you all know, the town's funded largely through sales tax, and some of the big box retail businesses are really struggling. We've had Gander Mountain go out of business fairly recently. It's a fairly significant national issue that certainly affects the town. So one immediate action that we talked about with this group was to maybe revisit our general commercial and regional commercial districts and see what uses are in there. Are there some that can promote better the objectives of the town, some that maybe should be removed or revisited, or maybe have some use on review provisions added to those, and maybe there's a need for us creating new zoning districts, kind of breaking up our existing commercial districts, because they're pretty broad. If you look in your packet at all the uses that's allowed in our commercial zoning districts, it's pretty broad, and it's kind of a hodgepodge in some cases. Some things have been added over the years due to specific projects that were brought before the town, and zoning provisions were created for those projects. So I think we need to maybe step back, and take a look at these commercial districts. Maybe we need to create kind of an activity hub district, a neighborhood commercial in certain locations. Maybe we need a gateway overlay district that has additional design requirements for the entranceways into our community. Not things that would discourage people from trying to develop in the town, certainly, but just trying to signal that you're entering a different community, that we have, kind of an identity, a look to us, and something that people remember, about the town. So when the staff kind of looked through the current uses that we have in general commercial, there were some things that I think I would question certainly in certain locations as to whether they would be appropriate and may need some adjustment in the C1 or maybe removed altogether. Things like, retail outlets for farm implements and equipment. Banks we've talked about in the past. I'm not anti-bank by any means, but we have a lot of banks, and that's not a bad thing. But, we do have to think about the wise use of available property given our tax structure, and we, may want to consider those type uses as being more in an office or lower intensity type zoning district rather than just being allowed as a blanket use throughout all commercial districts, because we have situations where somebody places a bank on a piece of property that could have otherwise been a nice restaurant or something. And banks are very attractive, and they're good visual additions to communities. But we just have to think about our tax structure, and maybe providing for those type of non-revenue generating uses in specific locations in the town rather than opening them up throughout commercial. Some other things that we've noticed, automotive services, those are not a bad thing either, but I think we've got to be careful that we may not want to see those in certain areas like neighborhood activity hub areas, for example, or gateway areas that might not be what you want, as somebody's coming into your community. They're not a bad use. But again, maybe just kind of breaking up what we have and thinking about it a little bit differently. Maybe a lot of communities where I was from in Greenville, we had an arterial commercial zoning district that it was more auto-oriented type uses, and it was differentiated from neighborhood commercial, which is more small-scale buildings and errand running type buildings and developments and things like that. So we kind of broke our commercial district into those different subcategories. So retail, rental, and leasing of automobiles, that's another thing that would probably be great in an arterial commercial, but I question as to whether that would be appropriate throughout all commercial zoning districts, and particularly in like a gateway area or a neighborhood commercial area that we might want to have as a transition to surrounding neighborhoods. So I don't know how you all feel about these uses or the general thought process that the staff's conveying. We talked about in the land use plan, our consultants also were looking at trying to come up with creative ways to repurpose some of our aging shopping centers. Now, one of the things they suggested was to potentially allow residential as a permitted use. We see that happen sometimes in larger communities like old warehouse districts. I've seen that a lot, like in Asheville and Richmond and places like that, in much bigger cities, and we may not be ready for that here. But that was something that the consultants mentioned, that we, may want to think about if you had the surrounding conditions that would be conducive to residential. In the C2, it's pretty similar to the C1. It's very broad in what's allowed in there. That is a zoning district that is geared toward the interstate interchange and people that are not familiar with the town, generally regional interstate travelers, so gas, food, lodging type uses are what you would typically see in a regional commercial. Some of the things that are currently provided for in regional commercial, I think, are probably questionable, like banks, real estate offices, medical spas, indoor kennels, and things like that. I don't know that somebody traveling on the interstate some of those uses is really, appropriate for that. So that may need to be broken up as well. Something else that was talked about in the land use plan for the Outlet Drive corridor in particular was specified as a future land use of office and light industrial. It's kind of like an employment center, which we really don't have anything like that. Now, it's not a revenue generating type district directly, so that's something we need to think about with our tax base structure. But if you do have an employment center, you do have people that are here in the community, and they are going to those businesses and eating or whatever, shopping. So that's something that was specified in that Outlet Drive corridor, another gateway portion of the town. So I guess the staff's recommendation on all these is that we're going to go through with the steering committee and look at these areas a little bit more intensely and maybe circle out different areas where we may want to break up potentially our commercial zoning districts and try to create something different that is more appropriate with maybe what at least our vision is at this time and what we'd like to see those different areas look like in 10, 20 years from now. Does anybody have any questions on any of this? I just throw this out there because I wanted to get your all's feedback to see if you thought that we were on the right track or if we're completely off base, or you love banks and you don't want them restricted from anywhere in the town, and that's fine. I'm fine with that.
What I get worried about is when we start discriminating on some businesses that are non-revenue generating and not on others. I think that's dangerous. And I guess things that come to mind are a dental office, medical office, maybe insurance sales. And so there's other businesses that are located in C1 that don't produce sales tax revenue for the town. Yep. So if we're going to do this, I think we need to cohesively look at it. Now, I'm not saying we just need to blanket take out everybody that doesn't produce sales tax out of C1. I'm saying what we don't want to do is just because we have a lot of banks or, we have a lot of tire stores. Yeah. And so, do we maybe have too many of them? I don't know. But the reality of it is that I think it's a slippery slope if we start picking on some for a particular reason and not picking on others. So I think we really need to take a cohesive look at this.
And we may want to look at more of design rather than use is also another thing. We haven't really experimented much with form-based codes or anything like that. We may want to do that with one of a new zoning district or something, just as an experiment. But maybe the important thing and for the long term is how the building's built, its form on the site. Is it adaptable for other types of uses, just like the Dollar General building? I've gotten several calls. Well, Betty's gotten several calls asking who's building that house over there. So it's you got a building there that it's going to be a Dollar General now, but it's adaptable in its form and its appearance. That it could be an office, it could potentially be a house.
Well, that was by design.
Yeah,
we wanted
absolutely.
it compatible with a residentially characteristic area.
Yeah, and that's the thing that they worked with us on that. but my concern is that we may need to memorialize that a little bit more, because there may be a situation where we may not have someone as cooperative as that property owner was to work with the town and have three different versions of their store. We do have architectural design standards, which is a huge help, but I think some of these parts of the town, and that section of Kingston Pike, for example, I question as whether through there you should have C1 commercial, along that curve through there. I just don't think I think that really needs to be revisited and see if there's something that would be more appropriate in the context of that and what's around it and what's likely to be around it 20 years from now. So I would agree with you that I don't want to necessarily signal out any uses. I mentioned the banks just because we've had discussions about that in the past. But it may be that, I guess the general point is I think the C1 may need to be segmented somewhat and not so broad throughout the town, and the C2 potentially as well. And maybe we identify, like a bank, I think could be a perfectly acceptable use in a mixed use, in a mixed use neighborhood, or even a neighborhood commercial.
Sure.
But again, it's the form of how it's built and what it's going to look like in relation to what's around it that I think is really the important thing. And that may be where our discussion ends up going with our steering committee, is more of a focus on what kind of form do we want to see in different parts of the town.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to point out real quick, if you look at like the Tennessee State Bank in Turkey Creek, that is a beautiful building, but it's in a very strange place for what it is. It's really almost to have a civic structure. It should be in a place that is kind of the center of the community. That would have been awesome in the town center to have that institutional look. But in between Panda Express and Chili's is really weird. Yeah.
Reason why we have architectural design standards.
It's very appropriate that you look at this in advance, as you were saying, because if we let it get too far down the road, it's going to be too late to have any effect on what I foresee in the future, whether it be 10 years, 20 years. Watt Road is going to be very much a primary gateway, because I foresee, and Noah probably knows more about this than I certainly do, that all that area from Watt Road on Kingston Pike all the way up to Weigels, the old Weigels, that 12, whatever it was, 460.
And west outside the town, too.
Even up to Everett Road is going to be developed in the next forthcoming.
Yeah, that's the whole point of this. We wanted to be proactive instead of reactive.
But the looks, I'm with Noah on trying to discriminate against certain uses, except that the look, I think, will itself curtail some of the uses. Like, for example, farm implements and whatnot, or construction equipment or some such along a corridor just wouldn't make sense to me. A stable, for horses or some such. They're different
Nurseries
uses, but if we concentrate on the look, the aesthetics is much or more so than the uses, I think we're on the right road.
One of the things that, because people evidently know I'm on the planning commission, people are always coming up to me and telling me they moved to Farragut to get out of the commercial aspects of other areas of Knoxville. And I think if we would have these pods or districts, we would be able to keep the green space and the greenery that all these people mentioned to me. And we don't scatter it all out along Kingston Pike or Watt Road or wherever. But lots of people have told me, I didn't move to Farragut for the commercial. I moved there for good schools and a great place for my kids to grow up with a yard. And I always bring out, well, you don't pay a property tax and we, need the revenue, but they still don't want.
They want their cake and eat it too.
Well,
Exactly.
yeah. Surprise,
Yeah,
surprise.
exactly. But I can understand, that when you scatter out commercial down one of the biggest things that I heard about was the car rental. And when you scatter out things like that down Kingston Pike, you're taking away the green aesthetics that people like around here.
My thought is, if we move some of these into a different zoning district, perhaps office, it's not like they can't come and request a rezoning to office.
Right,
We have
yeah.
office mixed in with commercial all over the place.
Sure, yeah.
It just gives us a little bit more control over where these things happen, because some of the properties where we've seen banks, we could have had a restaurant that would have been and they've taken prime property that could have been a restaurant, and certainly in time a restaurant would have come to these certain locations because they're such prime property, and it's frustrating to see something go up that we really didn't want to see there, because we're not putting our zoning in an appropriate way, and quite frankly, a bank it seems to be less intensive than a restaurant. Don't we want the restaurants where our commercial zones are? Because that's where you're going to have the smell and the garbage and whatever. They belong in certain locations where they're going to do well. So I think that to me, it's fine if we move these to another location, to another zoning district that is still something that's legitimately used next to commercial. It's a purposeful rezoning. Yes, we know a bank is going here because we're going to rezone this office. So I don't have as much an issue with it.
And I think one of the things that the bank differentiates from offices is, in an arterial commercial setting, it would have drive-through lanes, just like a drive-through restaurant. So, again, if you're looking at form, if you want to have a bank in a neighborhood commercial zoning district, you probably wouldn't want to have drive-through lanes, because that's not really what you're trying to do. But you could have maybe a banks with drive-through lanes in more of a arterial type commercial zoning district, or general office or something like that. So you wouldn't be zoning them out by any means, but you would basically, and they could still go in potentially a neighborhood commercial. It's just they would have to revisit their form, so that if the bank moves out, somebody could move in without having to make a substantial site modification. And it also has a more pedestrian-friendly feel if you don't have those drive-through lanes that you oftentimes see with the banks. Now, there's plenty of banks that don't have drive-through lanes. I see them a lot in downtowns, walk-up ATM machines and things like that. So,
Well, I'm sure we'll see one in our town center eventually.
yeah. So it's the form, really, I think, that has the long-term value.
The
Is it
city of
adaptable?
Knoxville, are they overhauling their commercial zoning districts as well?
Yeah,
Are they going to a form-based, is it all going to be form-based, or are they
I don't know that
just?
they've gotten that far yet.
Okay,
They're overhauling their entire zoning ordinance, which it's much more outdated than ours and very complex. I've looked at it many times, and it is hard to follow. So I'm sure they'll have some form-based in there, probably. Cumberland Avenue is a form-based code district, and the South Waterfront is as well. We just haven't had that experience yet, but I think it's something that we might want to experiment with maybe the mixed-use neighborhood or activity hub areas, because I think that can maybe get us what we want, so that you're not really focusing as much on the uses. You're looking at the built environment, and is it adaptable to changing uses and changing conditions, so that you're not stuck if something happens like what's happening to the big boxes occurs, that you're not, you don't end up with a bunch of vacant properties because you have a a land use that was not really sustainable.
Can you give me a quick understanding of form-based, what that means exactly?
Well, you're talking about the placement of
The size and scale of the buildings.
size and scale, the
Look
configuration of the building on the lot and in relation to what's around it.
Like Dollar General looks like a house. Some people think it's a house. That's kind of part of the form-based, is we're not thinking about how that building is being used, it's how it all relates to each other, so that
So much
It's
different
cohesive-
from the
there's a
normal
cohesive feel
Dollar
to it.
General, you know.
I'm not certainly an expert on form-based. I'll be the first to tell you that. I know a little bit about it, but we've never done it here in Farragut, so I'm not an expert on it. I think our group is going to have I'll try to get somebody from the city to talk with our steering committee group about it, how it's worked on Cumberland Avenue, and some things that we might want to consider if we want to pursue that type of.
One building that I always point out is is it architectural office? It's across from Ingles,
yeah.
Yeah.
going into, what's the name of that road?
Linda Heights.
Yeah, Linda Heights.
Foxhall Goodson. Yeah.
Right, that's just a great addition
Yeah,
to
that's-
that
Yeah.
location.
Well, a lot of those on that, they look a lot like houses. They look residential, those
Yeah.
buildings. The one that the chamber
The
is
chamber,
in.
yeah. Michael Bates
The
built
houses
that
on either
building.
side,
Yeah.
yeah. They all look residential.
Yeah.
Are we looking at something where we're going to handle this in-house, or do you think
It just depends on, I don't know.
it could,
it
this
could
looks
get-
like a little snowball right
Yeah, I
now?
know it,
That just
yeah.
kind of,
The danger with form-based zoning is it is not near as objective as the zoning we have today. So when you have a consultant, especially an outside consultant that gets hired by a big box store or a developer or a doctor's office builder, we don't have we can't relay the information to them to be able, on a piece of paper, to be able to give them all the information. So there's going to be a lot, kind of like the planned commercial down at Watt Road that we struggled with for a long time. It's challenging, and it takes a lot of time. It'll take a lot of staff time, and it'll put a lot of burden on the applicant to work through that process because of what I may see as form-based compatibility. You may not. And there's no black or white to say it is or it isn't. It can happen.
But when you see it,
Well, it does help, but remember, you got
Too
tomato,
subjective.
tomato.
yeah.
And so it's real challenging. I do think that something that we've not utilized in the past that Mark has brought up is we ought to explore use on reviews. It gives you a little bit more flexibility for the things that we've talked about tonight, whether it's the farm equipment or the tractor stores or the tire stores or banks or whatever. And it doesn't necessarily slow down the process for the applicant to all of a sudden have to step and, down zone to office when all of a sudden they have these expectations of commercial for a lot of years. So I think there's other tools that we could put in the toolbox. I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong. I just do think there are other options out there that we should explore as part of this process.
How does use on review work? Is it designated in the code itself? If you're this,
Well, basically,
you're
you got
this?
things that are permitted, and then you have things that are explicitly prohibited,
Okay.
and then you have things that are permitted based upon use on review.
maybe.
Okay.
And typically, we like to say, here are the things that you can do, and if it's not right here, you can't do it. It's easier to say that so somebody doesn't think of something that we hadn't thought of yet.
Think about all the rest.
And so, and Mark can help me out on this because Mark has a lot more training than I ever have or ever will. But basically what it does, it says, under certain scenarios, the Planning Commission may approve the following uses.
Yeah,
And that's a use on review.
And you'd have to have some guidance for the planning commission to make that decision in your zoning ordinance, because otherwise it could get political and you might not have it could
Way
be
too
very
subjective.
subjective.
That's
So a lot of times they'll reference the
criticism.
plan, your community's plan. They may even have specific design provisions in there for certain uses, that it's a use on review if A, it's consistent with the future land use plan for this corridor, B, it has no drive-throughs, or, I don't know, just you can, so that you can do it, but then you got, these conditions that you need to.
Well, we're going to have conditions anyway. There's no easy way to skin the cat of some of
No.
the things that we're talking about.
No,
but
there's not.
that is one of the tools that we could explore that I don't necessarily think it would dramatically slow down an applicant's process. Some of the other things I think would.
I think what we probably need, at least from my perspective, to do is identify the critical parts of the town that are relatively undeveloped at this point, and then try to get some concrete recommendations on how we want to address those. And then that could go in all kinds of directions, and that could require a consultant, but at least we identify those critically important properties or locations that we really want to people to identify as being in Farragut.
That's what the committee's doing now, right?
Yes.
Part of
Yeah.
two objectives.
Yep. This will be our third meeting next week, so that we'll be looking at that next week as part of that meeting. Then we'll be going to some sites too and looking at some actual developments and talking with some people with the city of Knoxville, for example, and maybe other communities, what have been some of their struggles with certain types of projects, and maybe learn from their experiences. Things
Don't
like
do
that.
what they did.
Yeah, we'll make new mistakes so that we can share with others.
Right and wrong.
Yeah.
Are you all okay with the general ideas here then? Is that and
So
what?
far, yeah.
Okay. All right, well, we'll pursue that on then with our steering committee.
In that case, the October 19th, 2017 meeting of the Farragut Municipal Planning Commission is adjourned.
Shortest meeting we've had in a while.
That was amazing.
It's pretty good.
I don't know if it developed purposely that way,
Called
but
it
there's
closed.
the downtown area.
We don't
And then
move to
there's,
adjourn, I guess.
Radio Center.
You had some
Crescent
good
Center.
ideas. I really
Program.
Radio
appreciate
Center's
that.
kind of on the west